Welcome to the HVAC Financial Freedom Podcast, a show where we talk about HVAC business ownership and financial freedom by sharing stories and advice of experts who can help you get there. Now your host, John Victoria.
Good morning and welcome to the HVAC Financial Freedom Podcast. My name is John Victoria, your host, and today we have a fun topic as we are moving to the end of 2022. And so I'm here with Mitchell Sharpe, and we're talking a lot of things, one of them being end-of-year strategies to maximize your tax savings for 2022. And before we hop into Mitchell's bio, just wanted to share that today's show is sponsored by Pollyanna, a digital marketing company specializing in SEO for the trades. And so with that, you just want to hop quickly into an introduction to Mitchell Sharpe, who is here with us live today. He is the founding partner of SKC Co CPAs. He's been a trusted advisor, mentor, and coach for hundreds of entrepreneurs over the last 40 years. And what makes him different is that he has a holistic approach to approaching or supporting the specific needs of business owners, evaluating their goals, both personal and professional, and achieving the objectives in the short and the long term. And so, for a lot of us, that is growth profitability, but also life events such as preparing for college or estate planning. And this is all throughout the different shifts in the market. We know 2022 has been an interesting market for all of us and the challenging conditions that we all may face. And so the other reason why I want to bring Mitchell on is that he is different than the typical CPAs that I run into. And he truly does practice what he preaches with his company. There's a very deep focus on culture, his people, technology, and quality control. And I share with him the similar philosophy of being a visionary, and I love that he is a visionary leader. And so aside from that, in his spare time, he coaches AAU basketball, mentors players for college, enjoys fishing, hiking, reading, lots of outdoorsy things, and him and his wife and 3 children reside in Kinnelon, New Jersey. Hopefully I got that right. So welcome to the show, Mitch.
Thank you.
Awesome. So very excited. So I think just to kick things off, I'm always curious about the passion and the inspiration of how people hopped into what they're doing today. So I was just curious if you could start off with your inspiration behind becoming a certified public accountant and also in specializing in helping entrepreneurs with their finances.
Okay. Well, I think it goes back to high school, college days where, I noticed a few things. One is my dad had a small pharmacy, and I also worked through high school and college for an Army Navy store. And I noticed that my father got no support at all from a CPA. And, so he's a pharmacist without business background, and he was really on his own. And at times there were things that happened that we probably wish we could have avoided. And then working for the Army Navy store, that accountant was on site at least once a month, as I remember. And the owner of the store really had a relationship with the accountant. So I used to talk to the accountant named Lou once in a while, and I just got a sense that, and I remember the owner of the store said to me that his relationship with Lou was important to him. And I don't remember any details, but that made an impression on me because I noticed that he had a meaningful relationship with his accountant, and my father did not. I think that made an impression on me. And at that point, that at least got my attention. And as I went through college, not really knowing what I was going to do, by the time I decided to go ahead and become a CPA, that was always in the back of my mind. So that seed was planted. I got out of college and graduate school. I went to work for Price Waterhouse. And that didn't really last too long for me because it really wasn't really wasn't what I was passionate about. I ended up going to work for leaving Price Waterhouse and going to work for the accountant of the Army Navy store. So that was a big change from working on IBM. All of a sudden, I'm working on the local doctor,
Wow.
local drugstore, things like that. But that really that did resonate with me. And what had happened was Lou had gotten sick and needed help. That was my opportunity to get some experience there. And then it wasn't too long after that, I was about 26 when I started my own firm. I got to kind of laugh when I say started my own firm because it was essentially me and a desk and a phone. And I had enough work to keep me busy about a day a month. But that's how
Mm.
it started.
I love that. I mean, great things always start with humble beginnings. And, I love that, it started with, just some of these realizations with, working at that Army Navy store. And then that kind of spurring a lot from there. And that's kind of cool as well. I didn't know. So background Navy, dad was Navy. So we have a little bit of connection there. I attended school over at the United States Naval Academy down in Annapolis. And so, yeah,
Okay.
small world.
Yep. Yep.
Love that. And so from there, so you said about 26 when you started the business. I guess some people, they never make the leap to business ownership. And there's a few
Mhm.
people who might be listening right now where they're working for a company, they're an employee, they might have some ideas of how to make things better. For you, like what clicked in your mind to want you to make that leap versus like continuing to work, in an established system? Um, like, I guess what was that motivation, and what would you say to someone who is on that fence at the moment?
Okay. I guess I probably, on some level, I was never on the fence. And in fact, um, I was probably in high school when my mother said to me, you know what? You're just like your father. You better not end up working for anybody else. You're just like him. So that might have planted a seed, or else I already, on some level, knew that myself. So even when I was at Price Waterhouse, I had, that in the back of my mind. So I think I knew that pretty early. Just my personality or whatever was
Hmm.
like, I gotta be on my own. So that was there early on, and then when that opportunity came, one of the things that made me do it was I had gotten engaged, and I said I better take my shot now. I
Mm.
better go out and
Right.
take this shot while I can. You know, I was, as I remember, living very affordably at the time,
Hmm.
uh, and I think what happened was I was out in a small apartment, and then when I started the firm, I think I actually moved back home for a year before we got married. And that was definitely, listen, I just starting up, I had no income,
Hmm.
so I had to limit my expenses, and I think that's, listen, that is not easy. How do you make that move? How do you make that decision? So that's how I managed it. I said, if I'm going to be married in a year, I better take my shot now and move back home. And then after that, hustled my butt off, even though I didn't have much of an idea what to actually do, but I just winged it just to get that, just to get the thing moving where there was a critical mass, I guess is the word I'm looking for, so that I could at least pay some bills. And that was a little nerve wracking at that point, I will say. So, I could definitely empathize with people getting ready to make that move. But what I do remember looking back now, for me, I had to do it. It was compulsive.
Mm.
I had to do it. I wanted to do it. No, not doing it. Um, so I think, call it passion, call it compulsion, whatever it was. Uh, in a way, that was a good thing because it was. you know, you're taking your shot. You got really no safety net.
Mm-hmm. And I relate so much. I think the age that you started as well, right? There's not as many obligations. Maybe you have some peers who are like, oh, they're doing this, they're doing that. But it sounds like frugality at that time was a key value, just to, increase, your run rate, how long you can go. And yeah, I love what you said. It's just at the start, it's just a lot about figuring things out, getting to critical mass. And as they say with entrepreneurs, a lot of us, we don't come from a background of business. But with entrepreneurs, hey, if you're jumping out of an airplane, they're building the parachute on the way down. And so I think a lot of us relate. I relate very closely to your story. Love that.
So that's a while ago, but the thing that really sticks with me is how, that idea of passion and compulsion, that um, having to do it, it gives you that sort of, you want to call it courage to take the leap.
Mm-hmm.
Because I can see how anybody on the precipice is like, okay, ready, are we ready to jump off? Take a deep breath. But I was more like, I have to do this. It's just the way I'm wired, I think.
Mm-hmm. Agreed. Yeah, and that's a beautiful thing that that seed was planted in you early to think about, hey, this is a path to take in life. It might be a bit more risky, but hey, it's potentially a better path. Control my own destiny. Um, and so I guess from that, so you've been, working in the field for over 40 years with different entrepreneurs, helping
Right.
them, yes, with their finances, their taxes, but really also from what we talked about in the past, like it's much bigger than that. And so I was wondering if you could speak to the holistic approach that you take and your firm takes when you're working with clients. Like what does that look like, and how there's lots of pieces that are moving, right? Earlier we talked about the professional, the personal goals, the short and the long term. How do we begin to think about the holistic approach?
Okay. Well, I think that, as I mentioned before, I was observing what, was going on between the owner of the Army Navy store and his CPA, and filing away in my head. And I said, uh, gee, his name was Howie, the owner. Howie really relies on me. And I think I would like to be part of a relationship like that. And, so when I started my own practice, I would meet people, and when I worked with, listen, I'm 26 years old. My first clients were, as I always say, gas stations and pizza parlors. And people would say, oh, well, what does that mean? Well, how much help do they need? And you know what? They could use a lot of help, because a guy who's running a gas station, he's fixing cars and pumping gas. What does he know about taxes? What does he know about cash flow? What does he know about profit and losses? So I would go out on site every month to the gas stations. And a funny aside is, some of them where I had to work, uh, they didn't have heat. So in the winter, they put one of those electric heaters by the table. So my feet were burning, and above the waist, I was freezing. So I remember those days.
Oh,
So I don't take for granted today when I'm sitting in a place that's 70 degrees. I think that's a wonderful thing,
yes.
because I was in all kinds of different environments. And but I would be on site every month, and I would talk to them about these things. I'd say, listen, in a gas station, they live on volume, but they also live on what they call pool margin, which is essentially the gross profit on the gas. So we would have discussions about that. We'd have discussions about in the repair bays, what's the efficiency? If you're able to bill out a certain amount per hour for a mechanic, what's our realization rate? And they were very receptive to having those conversations. And what happened from there was they told their friends about it. So early on, a big part of my practice was gas stations, transmission shops, auto body shops, because that's how it happened. They all told their friends.
Yes.
Um, but the idea was that I really engaged with them, and when you do that and you see sometimes the light bulb go on and you see them take action and then you see the numbers reflect it, what I'll say is that's kind of what gets me up in the morning. It's not filling out 1040s. And by the way, back then, as you might guess, all the way back then we were doing them by hand.
Oh my.
uh, but that said, the 1040s were integral part of what we did, but that's really not what got me up in the morning. What the exciting part related to tax was the planning, where we were doing some tax planning during the year, and by the time I was doing the return, we all knew what the tax return was going to say. So, that's kind of early on the methodology, the mindset, how it started. And, it is, I can't believe that it's 40 years later, but, the mindset for me is really the same. It's, the clients might have changed. A lot of my clients are, maybe they have 50 people in their software companies or distributorships, but the mindset for me is the same. And that mindset really resonates, and what the reason I say that is the firm is about 30 people now, and it's not because I was out there actively marketing. I didn't do any marketing. It was all word of mouth. And that's what I mean by that. It resonates. And I always say what we do and how we do it may not be for everybody, but if people want that connectivity, that input, one couple of clients to say, you should not say you're my accountant, you're the guy that lets me sleep at night. That's been said a few times. So that's that differentiation. And that really is the basics around the mindset and the approach.
Of that, yeah, that's a huge distinction. It's not, oh, you're my tax guy. It's you're the guy that
Right.
helps me
Yes.
sleep at night. That's a huge thing, and the numbers, they translate to real world realities, right? If things are down,
Absolutely.
it's are people, are we going to make payroll? I mean, are we going to be able
Right.
to, our
Yes.
team, afford groceries and things like that, or are things
Yes.
great?
What I always say is that the P&L is a result of human behavior. Uh, so when we look at what the numbers say, it's like, what's the story behind those numbers? What's the causality? That's a word that I use a lot. Causality. And the human behavior part comes to, if the managers aren't managing, or they're not managing properly, strategically, appropriately, the numbers will reflect it. So that if I was looking at a number or a trend in numbers and we see, and it can be a positive trend or a negative trend, because if there's a negative trend, you want to dig in and look at, what do we have to change? What's going on? So, you may be looking at something like gross profit. Why is the trend in gross profit negative? But the thing that I love to talk about also is, oh, gee, why is the trend in gross profit positive? And here's why that's important, because managers manage, leaders lead. You try things. If you have a positive trend, what's really interesting to me is, again, causality. Because what happens in small businesses, we institute some new procedure, we do it for 3 months, and then we forget about it. But if we catch something where there's a positive trend, we want to understand causality and then institutionalize it in that business. And that can be huge. And that's something most people don't talk about. So we're always watching, trends, and it's not overly complex. We just do some basic trend analysis and say, hey, how come the last 2 or 3 months this department has really done so well? And then we go and talk to people and say, well, we did this. So we say, okay, from now on, you never stop doing that. And then we also want to talk to the other departments about this. So that's a great, that's a great strategy in terms of just watch the basic trends, and whether the negative trends, look at causality, make the appropriate adjustments. The positive trends, institutionalize them, and then keep following it long term to make sure it doesn't go away. Because can't tell you how many times over the years when I saw positive trends and we identified the cause, and then everybody forgot about doing that behavior.
Have that. So trends, looking at both the positive and negative, and that's a key distinction. Institutionalizing what were those boots on the ground activities that resulted in that positive trend in the P&L.
Yeah, and you know what? Here's the thing that I like to throw out there. Anybody who's in business knows this, I think. You know what? Sometimes they don't know it inherently. Sometimes I got to tell them, listen, they ask me questions and say, I'm just a trucker. You know what? If you're running a successful business, you're not just a trucker. You got to have a lot of positive attributes. You got to be smart. You have to have persistence, because, keeping a small business going for the long term, it ain't easy. So I'm forever telling clients that are, contractors, truckers. I work with a lot of so-called blue collar type of businesses. I'm always talking to them about, man, you really got it nailed. You're doing great, because look at these numbers, look at the consistency, look at the performance. But my job is to help them, ask some of the right questions, follow some of the KPIs, key performance indicators, and talk about it. And when you do that, it can open up a whole new world to a business owner, because if you think about it, it's an HVAC contractor. Who's talking to the owner and or management about those issues? When you're talking about a closely held company where it's the owner, and maybe there's two owners, and then there's a manager or two, and then 20 guys in the field. Who's talking to that business owner and or management about these issues? That's kind of where I love to jump in and try to be of value.
And so another interesting thing is that we are, as of this recording, we have about 2 weeks until the end of this year. And I know on my end, I've been thinking through, like, what are some ways to reduce our tax liability for this upcoming year. And I was just curious if you have any advice or maybe some key things to look at for an HVAC business owner, or someone in the trades who is looking to save some money, not donate as much to Uncle Sam at the end of this year.
You know what? There's so many things. I'd like to just touch on a few. Okay, some of them I'm sure a lot of the folks have heard about. Some of them maybe not so much, but this is where the close interaction with your professional advisors is important, to have these conversations so that you can look at each one of them in some depth. But let's just, touch on a few. The first one is making sure you have the appropriate retirement plan. I'm working now with a small business. They have 2 employees only, but they've been very profitable the last few years. And we are talking about what's called the cash balance plan. In essence, what that is that in some situations, a cash balance plan makes it possible for the owners to put away a substantial amount of money on a tax deferred basis, multiples of a 401k.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, now that doesn't always fit for everybody, but this individual, it's only him and one other person to cover. That other person is a relative. So all the money put into this plan goes to family. So instead of putting away $60,000 a year, we're talking about putting away between $150,000 and $200,000 a year.
Wow. Okay,
and this is not a big company. This is a company that's in a groove and has just done very well for the last few years. So have the right plan, whether it's the 401k, whether it is a cash balance plan attached to that. That's important to understand that and fund that along the way. By the way, the best way I know to fund retirement plans is throughout the year, not one shot, because not to get too far out into the weeds, but by funding it, monthly or quarterly, you're doing two things. One is you're smoothing cash flow, but the other thing you're doing is you're dollar cost averaging into your investments, which that's a risk management tool. So retirement plan. The other thing is to look at special depreciation rules. I think a lot of people are familiar with that, but you can, in essence, buy a piece of equipment. I have a client who's buying a $100,000 piece of equipment at year end, and he's financing it, but we'll be able to take a $100,000 deduction this year under Section 179. So buying equipment, a lot of the clients, HVAC guys, they got a fleet. We make sure that we've updated the fleet that needs to be done before the end of the year. Because you're looking at a van. Vans today are ridiculously expensive. I know that it used to be not that long ago, $35,000 to replace a van. Now, if you're going new with fit out, it's $60,000 to replace a van. Mm-hmm. But that $60,000 can be written off immediately. So that's something to keep in mind, especially in the HVAC industry. Equipment and vans can be written off 100%. If you buy them in December, you can write it off 100% in that year, even if you're financing it. So that's critical. Another thing I want to mention that a lot of people may not be familiar with is the research and development credit. What I can tell you is that, generally speaking, the R&D credit for HVAC contractors is a slam dunk. And people say, wait a minute, I don't do research and development. But by the IRS definition, if you're an HVAC contractor, you do research and development. And just briefly to address that, if you're on a job and that job entails a little bit of design, and or even if it was designed by somebody else, you get to the job and you've got to reconfigure part of it to make the ductwork fit or anything like that, you're doing research and development. And my clients that are in HVAC, anywhere from 10 guys to 50 guys, that sort of thing, and their credits are between $30,000 and $80,000 per year.
Wow.
So there's a lot. So any HVAC contractor needs to look into research and development credits. Like I say, it's essentially a slam dunk. So that's one of the ones that many people don't know about. So I always like to bring that up. So there's a couple. Let's see. There's a lot of stuff that I guess I would call deeper stuff that you can do in planning in terms of deferrals and the form that you're doing business. If you are a company of a certain size and you are reporting as an LLC, you might want to look at becoming an S Corp, because there's something called QBI. And QBI is, what that says is, whatever your net income is, if you do your accounting right, whatever your net income is, we're going to give you 20% of your net income tax-free. So that's something that some people may be taking advantage of, but the key there is not just to let it be random. The key is to do the planning so that you're maximizing it. And sometimes that has to do with your form of business. So that's just a handful of things to talk about. We could go on a long time, I think more, but hopefully that's at least some things that people may be familiar with, and some that they may not be familiar with.
Of that. And just for a few of them, so for the R&D tax credit, if anyone wants to check it out, we have a previous episode from Robert Curtis on the R&D tax credit if you want to do a deeper dive. And then maybe one thing to highlight as well for the cash balance plan. This so I think it's interesting because I think some people like myself in the past, I've had a SEP,
Mhm.
but you're limited, depending on, from my understanding, you're limited based off
25%
of
of
your.
net income and things like that, up to, depending on age and things, but it can be limited, yes.
But then with the cash balance plan, like you said, it's instead of being able to put this small chunk, maybe it's 20, 30, 40K, you're able to put hundreds of thousands of dollars into
Yes.
this retirement plan. And I think that's a very, the tax savings on that is huge. And so I
Yes.
definitely wanted to underscore that. If it works for someone's specific business, the size, if it makes sense, then that's potentially huge tax savings for you.
The other thing that I'll just mention in passing for guys who are further along in their career, if they're HVAC business owner or any other business owner, if they're contemplating sale, uh, the one thing that there's certainly things to talk about, but the one thing that you need to talk about, even if you're looking out, you know, 2 years from now, 4 years from now, looks like a sale, something called an opportunity zone fund. Uh, it is an amazing opportunity for tax savings in the event of a sale of a business. So I just wanted to mention that because
Mm.
that doesn't seem to be out there much. It's starting to become more well known, but when I'm bringing it up to people that I meet, most of them are saying, I've never heard of that. And that is potentially very, very significant.
Mm. And so it sounds like it's only relevant in the time of a business sale. Is there other,
Yes.
I guess, some other things to consider? Because I do know that there's a number of listeners who have spoken to me about, hey, I'd love to be able to hit, these certain things in my P&L, and then I'd love to sell. There's a lot
Right.
of private equity companies in the
Yes.
HVAC
Yes.
space looking to buy up. And so I think it's very timely. So how does, I guess the opportunity zone work in case someone was
Okay.
interested?
Well, first of all, if people are looking to sell, just, there's a whole methodology to that maybe it's not the time to get into now, but there is a whole methodology to sell. Uh, and as far as the Opportunity Zone Fund, here's what happens with that. I sell my company today, and let's say, we can pick any round number. I sell it for $1 million, and say that I have $1 million capital gain. Well, here's what happens. If I sell that business and I have $1 million capital gain, I'm going to pay state and federal combined 30 to 40%, probably closer to 30% tax if it's all long-term capital gain on that million. So, $300,000, write that check tomorrow kind of thing. Opportunity Zone Fund, you can take some or all and invest it into the fund. And the fund itself is you're investing in real estate, but you're investing in institutional managed real estate. So the risk is not as high as if you or I went out and just bought a local building. So and it's set up as in a mutual fund type of scenario. And here's what happens: if I put that $1 million into the Opportunity Zone Fund, I don't pay any tax for 4 years. In 4 years, especially, and for the guys who are selling in 4 years, not only is it great to defer tax for 4 years, but I very well may be in a lower tax bracket in 4 years. So that's win-win. But that's not the big win. The big win is if you leave the money in the fund for 10 years, projections generally show that your $1 million becomes $2 million. Well, the real big bang is the growth for the 10 years. That $1 million of growth, you get it tax free. That's the big bang. That's the big bang. So that's why people should know about that. And what's happening now is that's something that's, I think, relatively new, and they're starting to put bells and whistles around it so that they're doing things like, okay, you go into the Opportunity Zone Fund, we're going to refinance the building 4 years out and give you tax-free money out of the fund to pay the taxes. So they're starting to, like I say, modify it so that they're making it, that people are getting creative with it, I guess you would say. So again, if you're looking to sell, whether it's 2 years out, 3 years out, yeah, the process of working with, private equity people is great. Like I said, there's all methodology attached to that. But then once you should be, if you're seriously looking at that, you should be talking to your financial advisor about an Opportunity Zone Fund. If you were talking to them 6 months or a year ago, they probably would have all looked at you like, what's an Opportunity Zone Fund? By now, most of them should be starting to get familiar with it, though.
I love it. So there's a few. So just to recap, there's multiple benefits. You still will have to pay tax at some point on that initial money that you put in, but
Right.
strategically you can time, maybe I want to be in a lower tax bracket, but also it's that growth. It's, tax-free growth. If it grows another million, that's in another 200,000-300,000 that you just saved right there.
So here's, very, very quick basic math. Let's say you don't do the Opportunity Zone Fund, and day one you pay $300,000 in tax, and then you have the growth, and then you pay another $300,000 in tax on the growth. Okay, so you're paying $600,000 in tax. What happens is you pay nothing for 4 years, so you can invest that money and make money on that for 4 years. Whereas you would have paid $300,000 in tax, you got $300,000 more invested, and then in 4 years from now you pay, let's call it $200,000, not $300,000, because you're in a lower tax bracket, which you may or may not be, but usually the highest bracket you're in is the year you sell. Okay, so you're paying 200 instead of 300, and then on the growth you're paying 0. So you're paying 200,000 instead of 3 plus 3, or 600,000. So 200 versus 600. So that's some very basic math, because there's other little things that go into it. But I think that captures it well enough so that you can't afford not to at least take a look at it.
Yes, that's three times the savings.
Yes.
It's amazing. I'm sure a lot of people will be excited to hear about that, for those who are unfamiliar. Great. So with that, I also wanted to talk through, I know you mentioned to me in a previous call about some success stories of different business owners that you worked with. And I was wondering if you could talk through like maybe some of those examples or case studies of folks where you had this more holistic approach to their finances versus, hey, I'm just going to complete, their tax forms, which is, a number of other, firms that might be out there.
Okay. I like to talk about two different cases. One is a client that I'm working with for less than a year, about 15 or 20 people in the company. And one is a client I've been working with for about 30 years. They're up to 50 or 60 people, I think, at this point. So the client that HVAC contractor I've been working with for less than a year, and is non-union, primarily commercial, non-union. And when I started working with the person, the owners, relatively new to it, was not a technical person. And so we walked in, and the essence was they were on QuickBooks, like many people, just using QuickBooks to pay their bills. And I think the idea was that overall there was really no guidance in any way. So she was just trying her best and to learn her way in. And so when I met with her, we looked, and we talked about things like, well, how are you managing your jobs? How do you hold people accountable? And I got that kind of sort of smile back, like, funny you should ask. Really don't know. So we started just talking about basic job costing and holding people accountable, and about the concept that, you know what, when you have a job, there's a couple of things that go into it. One is the estimator has to know what he or she is doing. And then second, and who's ever managing the job has to, actively manage to bring the job in, on budget, etc. So any one job has at least those two components, right? But how do we know? How do we know how we're doing? So what we started doing is now we're looking at jobs, and we're doing job costing in a way where it's not super sophisticated at this point, because we wanted to just introduce the concept, and I wanted the owner to see the value first before we make any kind of investment. And what she has said to me is, this changed my life. And we're now meeting with once a month with the management team and just going over these things. And we've already seen a little bit of some. It's early. It's early. It's only a couple of months into the process, but we've already seen movement in profitability. Already seen it. So that's an example. And then, once we have those kind of conversations, then usually clients are saying to me, "What else? What else? What else?" So, we talk about doing things in a tax advantage way. So I introduced the R&D credit, that came in. Other tax advantage things, retirement plans, ways to, while we're holding the staff accountable, we're also motivating them, because I believe that in business, that relationship, I always called it a two-way street. And I told people who work for me that I am going to expect a lot of you. If you want to work here, the bar's high, but you can expect a lot from me, because I'm going to spend most of my life thinking about the quality of your work experience. Because then you're going to go out and the company's going to do great. So that whole concept we're introducing, and that was a little uncomfortable, as it is for most people at the beginning. It's almost like, I really need to hold people accountable, and it was in this person's nature. She wanted to take good care of her people. That's in her DNA. But we talked about how, because sometimes you think you're doing a great job of taking care of people, and they think, maybe you're doing pretty good. But so the question is, why don't you just ask them? Well, sometimes when I suggest that, I get the jaw hits the ground. It's that old issue around inclusion. I'm a big fan of inclusion, because I think most people, when you ask an honest question, they'll give you an honest answer. And that gives everybody an opportunity to have a better quality of life and increase profitability at the same time. That's a win-win. So that journey has just started, but I love the energy that I'm getting back from the owner of this business. She's really, anxious to move ahead and keep going. And, it's kind of like I'm looking forward to continuing the process, because, we're just starting. She's relatively young. We're just starting. And in my head, I see this great upside, because she's passionate about what she does. So, that's a relatively new experience. One that's been going on for 30 years is, I have to laugh, because my relationship with this gentleman goes back 30 years, and we're good buddies, and great human being, passionate about his profession, tremendous acumen when it comes to understanding how machines work. He's just like, he may see this someday, so I have to laugh at him. But he's off the charts. in terms of how he in his brain neurologically, he can see what's going on inside those machines. Then he started a business because he's so smart at that. And then, but he knew nothing about business. So as he grew, it got harder and harder to pay the bills because he was not a business guy. He's a mechanic, although extremely talented. But when I say mechanic, I mean that in a very positive light. This man is unusually able, I guess I would say, and that's one of the things that makes it fun when I see him. People come to him with questions: how do I get this done? Problems, and just if he doesn't know, he'll figure it out. But then there's the business side where the business really went through some tough times, and then he hired us. It's probably about 30 years ago now. And we had interesting discussions along the way because I'd say some things to him like, you got to hold your people accountable. Oh, they'll do that themselves. Okay. Meanwhile, we start looking at the numbers and why are these jobs so unprofitable when you guys are so talented? Well, part of the reason was because he would say, we're just going to do this job so well, so incredibly well, that our reputation will grow. Plus, that's in his DNA, to be that good. However, the budgets didn't always allow for it. So here's a guy who's, got a great business, a great attitude, and the profit was minimal. And he was, making a living, but the profit minimal. And we had this dialogue for years. We just had this dialogue for years, and then, and every month we would dissect the numbers, and after a while, things just started moving forward, despite the fact that his bias was to always give the client more than they're paying for, because that was who he was, and I respected that, and I remember having conversations with him like, well, that's your choice, and I respect it, but if you're going to go that route, the profit will never be what it can be, should be, or what you want it to be. So, you've got the decision to make. And that decision didn't get made overnight. It got made gradually over years. And after a while, the business did become pretty profitable. The company has a great reputation. And the next part of it was that, well, now that we see how good we are at this, why don't we do any marketing of any sort? We have a couple of sales guys that we just say, okay, you're the sales guy, see you later, do what you're going to do, that sort of thing. No accountability, no management. And so that was the next conversation that went on for years. And about 4 years ago, the owner said, you know what, I'm not getting any younger. You want to take a shot at growing this thing, using because the business did well just because they were so good at what they did.
Yes.
All right. So now we jump into sales and marketing. Long story short, and I was part of that. First of all, I'm pushing it, I was close enough with him so I could sort of just keep on being obnoxious about it. And so I think we pulled the trigger 3 or 4 years ago. And what I'll say in a nutshell is that bottom line tripled in the last 3 years.
Wow.
And now what he always says is, I'm really glad that we made that decision. I'm glad that and he always busts my chops. I'm glad that I listened to you, even though you're not the brightest guy in the world. And I love telling that story because you know what it's about? Great company, great owner, great people in the company, but he had to overcome some of his biases. And it happened, and we worked together, I guess you would say, to do that. Because his bias was, and he'll tell you this, I just fix equipment. That's all I have to say. I would say, well, let's hold people accountable. Let's do this. But you know what? The heck with that. I just fix equipment. All right. And he used different language that I won't use here. And I was like, okay, but your bottom line will be what your bottom line is going to be until you make different decisions. And, and we're still working together and the company's doing great. And again, that's the type of thing that gets me up in the morning.
Yeah, you changed this man's life. It sounded like over decades, it was a shifting of the internal self-image, which is your internal self-image is such a strong magnet. It's hard to, get over that. So I think that's a beautiful story of how you coached him over literally decades and the fruits are there, right? That you said the sales and marketing decision, that's nothing to scoff at.
And I think one of the things that helps me is that maybe because of the fact that I had a dad who had a small business and worked for somebody else, I always had utmost respect for all these guys. I don't care what their P&L said. You know what? If you can do this and you can make this work, and then the fact that, the HVAC guys who are fixing this equipment, working on it, installing, fixing, maintaining, to me, that's a whole nother language that I absolutely respect these guys because I couldn't begin to even have a conversation with them. And once in a while, when they, we're in a meeting, somebody will talk about a certain job they're having a challenge on. I'll say, "Oh, you want me to go out there and take a look? I'll take some readings." But I really respect these guys. So it's a pleasure to work with them.
Love that. And we're about 8 minutes left for the podcast on the hour. So I think I wanted to transition into defining financial freedom and what that means for you, and just jam a bit about financial freedom as well as the topic of mindset. So maybe start off with the first question. The name of the show is HVAC Financial Freedom Podcast. But first, to you, what does financial freedom even mean?
Probably my definition is not much different than a lot of people's, which is to be able to make choices in your life that are, if not 100%, at least partly independent of the financial result. So like today, the reason that I keep working even at this later time in my life, I managed to build that financial freedom, and I'm grateful for that. But I keep working. It's a choice. That's freedom. It's a choice because I love what I do. So that's the choice. So that's kind of my version of it. And that's what I hope for others, is that they build their company such that the role that they play in their company is not driven totally by the financial result, which means that they built the company with the right team around them and things like that. That to me is, the financial freedom. And whether that means that you build it and sell or you build it and not sell. And what I found, sometimes people who wanted to build it and sell, when we built it out, we were building the company. Sometimes what happens is when you build the right team around you, now all of a sudden you have options. And it's kind of like, why sell? I just had a new client that came on board and said, I got our family business is now turned over to me, and it's worth a lot of money, and I would like to sell it. And then, okay, and then once we got into looking at it and talking about it and things like that, he changed his mind and said, wow, if I build this the way we're talking about it, I will have the freedom to do what I do, and this is a very profitable business. So I'm not thinking I want to sell this business anymore. And we're in the process now of bringing in a management team. So that's sort of a different version of that. So that's what financial freedom means to me in a nutshell.
Got it. And financial freedom is a goal that a lot of people have, but even having the skills, you gave the example of someone, mechanically amazing skills, but sometimes there's mindset things that stop us from getting there. And I was wondering if you could speak to maybe one or two of those things that, prevent people to give one quick example, if someone has the money psychology to spend as much as they earn, no matter how much they earn, they will never reach financial freedom. Could you talk to maybe some of those other things you've seen over the years in entrepreneurs and individuals that
Sure.
might stop them from getting there? And has to do with their mind.
Yeah, I can think of two things right away. One is the idea of I made a deal with a client who was, anytime he had any extra money, he went out and bought another bulldozer or backhoe. Anytime there was any money at all. And to the point where I think we've got more backhoes than we need here, but loved, I'm going to buy the biggest, the bucket is going to blah. So what I said after a while of getting to know this person was, I'll tell you what, you give me X number of dollars a month and then go buy all the backhoes you want. And that number was programmed so that if we just did this every month for the next 20 years, life would be good. So that's that mindset of people keep putting it off. And then, well, I don't need to save money because my business I'll sell it for retirement, which is, there's a certain amount of risk associated with that, of course. So I always said, I would like your business to be the gravy. We're going to build out a portfolio for you over the years so that the business value isn't what we hoped it to be. We're still okay. So every month, a certain amount of money goes away. And, that's where I brought up the conversation. I said, you give me this amount of money every month. We put, and, have it with a professional financial planner, and then go out and buy all the backhoes you want. That's the deal we made, and that's what's happening. The other thing that I noticed from a mindset standpoint is sometimes guys, they don't look at themselves as successful business owners. Sometimes their mindset is one of, what do I know? I just, it's the HVAC. Oh, I know about equipment. I don't know nothing else. I know about equipment. So why should I have such high expectations? Or maybe I do have high expectations, but I'm just not that sure I should, that sort of thing. And I love to have that dialogue. And we say, well, so listen, if you're passionate about what you do and you've started this business, you should be patting yourself on the back, number one. And then number two, then let's talk about how we take it to the next level in a way which hopefully is as pain-free as possible and can give you quality of life. And that's why all these conversations that I have all the time, that's geared to that. So that's that second part, that mindset of why should I have such high expectations? And some guys, some do, but a lot don't. A lot are just looking to, hey, I hope I can make payroll tomorrow. And that's it. And if I can make payroll, that's about all I can expect. And I like to sell to the business owner, no, you're passionate, you're smart, you should maybe expect more than that. Let's talk.
That positive expectation for the future. Yeah, it can be a fulfilling prophecy many times, the things that we expect.
Yep.
Love that. So awesome. So I think we're almost at the hour. Is there any last advice that you want to share with anyone? And I think also, how would people get into contact with you or your firm if they're interested in learning more about, developing out their holistic financial plan?
Okay. Well, again, I'm passionate about this. I love talking about it. And I will say that even if people are working with their CPAs and, sometimes there's a reluctance to start another conversation, what I can tell you is that I'm happy just to talk. I'd love to just talk, kick things around. And if we never talk again, that's great. Hopefully I can bring some value. And a lot of times I'll learn something. So this is my passion. So I invite that outreach, and I'm happy to give my cell, my email address, whatever you think's appropriate. I'm happy to put out there.
Sure. Yeah, whatever you feel would be best to connect.
Okay. Well, let me just throw it out there for anybody who might be interested. Cell 201-248-1455. And by all means, feel free. Love to talk. Uh, if not, my email address, msharpe, Sharpe is SHARPE, at SKC, AND, as an and, CO.com.
Perfect. Lock that in. Well, Mitch, I just want to say thank you so much for your generosity in terms of time as well as advice and wisdom, especially as the timing, as we come to a close with 2022, there's a lot of things, a lot of us, we weren't taught a lot of these things having to do with money and tax savings
Right.
and
Yep.
planning for the future. And you really are doing us a really great service by bringing us awareness to these concepts like the opportunity zone funds. That's 3 times the savings, as well as shifting our internal self-image, because a lot of times that's the magnet that holds us back. So just want to say thank you.
I
And
appreciate it.
it's a fun conversation. This is the stuff that I love talking about.
Mitchell?
I
Yep.
love digital marketing, but this is really the things that I feel like really moves the world forward. So thank you to all that you do and all the people that you impact.
Okay. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yeah. Then for everyone else, thank you for joining us on the show. Again, this show, and thank you to our sponsor, Pollyanna, for being able for us to have this show. And so with that, thanks so much. If we don't hear from you until the end of this year, have a great new year, happy holidays, and I'm wishing you a fantastic start to 2023. All right, take care, everyone.